Praying for a COVID-19 vaccine? Be careful what you pray for. I'm Scott Ott, and I'm with Stephen Green and Bill Whittle, and this episode of Right Angle is brought to you by the members at BillWhittle.com. Gentlemen, a lot of people are hoping and praying that we're able to develop a vaccine rapidly. In fact, the president has come up with something I think he calls Operation Warp Speed to tap into some of the core competencies of the government. And yes, there are core competencies in the government to be able to rapidly develop 300 million doses of some vaccine. However, during a sort of video podcast by a guy named Jason Goodman that's called Crowdsource the Truth, Alan Dershowitz, the Harvard professor emeritus of law, said that the state, meaning an individual state like Pennsylvania or Kentucky or California or Texas, has the right to force people to get vaccinated. And let me read the sort of most provocative quotes from this interview, and I watched it and I read stories about it. He says, "Let me put it very clearly," Dershowitz said. "You have no constitutional right to endanger the public and spread the disease, even if you disagree. You have no right not to be vaccinated. You have no right not to wear a mask. You have no right to open up your business." Later on, he says, "If you refuse to be vaccinated, the state has the power to literally take you to a doctor's office and plunge a needle into your arm." Stephen Green, is that the way you read the U.S. Constitution and the powers of the states within that sovereign power?
In a word, no. That said, I am pro-vaccine. I am hugely pro-vaccine. Look, vaccines aren't perfect, but what you're supposed to do is to inoculate the greatest number of people possible. Now, of those people, some of them were never going to get sick. They have a natural resistance to whatever it is that is out there. The vast majority in the middle, it's a really fat bell curve, could use that protection. And there's a small minority, the other end of the curve, that are going to get sick regardless. But out of that vast middle, some of those people are going to die if they catch whatever it is you're vaccinating against, because that's why you vaccinate, to protect people, to keep them from getting deathly ill. By vaccinating, by inoculating the greatest number of people possible, you're protecting the most vulnerable, the people who would probably die or become disabled if they got whatever this illness is. This is why I believe everybody should, of their own free will, get vaccinated. That said, I look at anti-vaxxers kind of like this. I love bad movies. Specifically, I love low-budget exploitation flicks from the 70s and 80s. You show me a movie title like The Incredible Two-Headed Transplant, or oh, I've got so many classics. I'm forgetting names right now. Oh, Dead Alive, early 90s. Amazingly great bad movie. Deathstalker, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Although 3 didn't quite live down to expectations. But I'm a reasonably intelligent guy who in most areas has pretty decent taste. But I love these stupid movies, and nobody is ever going to want to talk me out of it. Now, I've never met an anti-vaxxer who is dumb, not by a long shot. In fact, the anti-vaxxers I've all talked to seem to be more intelligent than average. That said, just like my love of bad movies, they seem to have a particular blind spot in their brain that doesn't see the advantage of this, not just for themselves, but for the greater community as a whole. That said, nobody has the right to drag me, or especially my kids, out of my house to force them to do anything like that.
Now, Steve, let me press a little bit on that button because essentially, and I'm making this argument. Nobody in this story, Dershowitz didn't make this argument, but I'm making this argument. Essentially, if you have a contagious disease that is spread through the air and that is carried on germs that come from the water droplets out of your mouth, you could liken that not just to walking down the street with a gun, but to walking down the street and continually discharging a gun that occasionally hits somebody with a bullet. Doesn't the state have the right to prevent you from engaging in behavior that's likely to harm people?
If the various states would like to take some sort of action, such as if you're not vaccinated, you don't get to use public spaces or crowded theaters or anything like that, I would be fine with that. I would be completely okay with that. To tell people, look, if you don't do this, we can't let you do that because you're endangering other people. But you still
Dershowitz
can't.
says that, by the way. Dershowitz says you should have an alternative and, for example, stay home.
Yes, but you cannot force people to inject things into their bodies. I don't think any state has the power to do that.
Bill Whittle, as we discussed in our Backstage episode, which is only accessible to members at billwhittle.com, Dershowitz says that the authority that an individual state has to do this is essentially an authority that they already had before the U.S. Constitution, and that was left with the states by, among other things, the 10th Amendment to the Constitution that says that those powers not delegated to the federal government remain with the states or with the people. I'm paraphrasing there. He also says that courts, including the Supreme Court, have decided in favor of the idea that states have the power to enforce public health standards for the good of the public. He cites a case from 1905 called Jacobson versus Massachusetts, in which the justices said something on the order of, if any individual is allowed to act without regard to the welfare of others, true liberty does not exist. In other words, you can't just go out and do whatever you damn well please if it's going to endanger other people. And state governments have a responsibility and a moral responsibility and a physical power to protect the residents of that state from you.
It's a great example to show just how stupid experts can be, really. I mean, just how unbearably, obviously stupid experts can be. So you say that according to Dershowitz's argument, we'll get to the 10th Amendment, states have the power thing, but basically his argument is, I do not have the right to go out and do something that might endanger other people.
That's roughly it, yeah.
Okay, so if I drive to work and I hit somebody and kill them, that's endangered other people. I suppose we better lock me down and make sure that I don't have a chance to do that, because traffic accidents kill tens of thousands of people a year. Likewise, flu kills tens of thousands of people a year too. And I suppose what he's saying is that I should not be allowed to go out of the house whether I know I have the flu or not. The state has the power to come into my house and take me away and vaccinate me against the flu every year. Is that what he's arguing? Is he arguing that
Bill,
we have...
But the state does have the power to pass regulations that are around that driving activity, as your metaphor or your analogy is using. You know, they can regulate what you're allowed to drive, how old you can be, whether or not you have to pass some sort of test in order to do that, whether you have to wear a seatbelt, whether you can be drinking at the time. All of those are subject to state regulation. So they have all kinds of constraints on your driving activity.
Well, first of all, he's wrong. I'll tell you why he's wrong. The reason he's wrong is because this argument can be used to accomplish any restriction of your freedom that you possibly can mention. I have a constitutional right to assemble. I have a constitutional right to free speech. I have a constitutional right to self-defense. I have a constitutional right to travel without unreasonable resistance and so on from the government. I have all of these rights. For him to say that the state has the ability to abrogate those rights because of the public health is to basically say that the state can do whatever it wants to, because the state can then define what the public health is. And that's why my argument about driving a car is a perfectly reasonable argument. If I wanted to get rid of automobiles, I could make the case that traffic accidents killing tens of thousands of Americans every year, according to Dershowitz's argument, is a threat to the public health. Therefore, automobiles are banned and all people must take public transportation, because that will save so many lives from vehicular accidents every year. That argument is precisely the same argument, and it simply is a fallacious absurdity. Likewise, if he's claiming that the state has the right to come into my house and vaccinate me against COVID-19, then by that same logic, it should have the right to come into my house and vaccinate me against the flu or against any other number of contagious diseases that had previously not even been up for discussion until this whole thing happened. It's basically an argument to allow the state to do anything it wants to in contravention of my direct constitutional rights. And this is why everybody knows that this thing is absolute nonsense. So let me give Mr. Dershowitz a question, because he's a lawyer and I'm just a guy who knows how to read English. which apparently is beyond his abilities. So let's take this thing to his conclusion. Let's say that the state has determined that everybody must be vaccinated against COVID-19. And let's say that I don't want to be vaccinated against COVID-19. Okay? I don't. I want to go out to the group of other people who don't want to be vaccinated with COVID-19, and I want to protest this law. So I go to the protest. I'm not vaccinated. He knows I'm not vaccinated because I've already told him I'm not vaccinated. That's why I'm there. He's going to arrest me on what grounds? What is the legislation that is going to be used to arrest me when I walk out to a protest against this policy? What legislation will be used to put me in jail out there as an unvaccinated individual who is out there protesting other unvaccinated individuals, as is my constitutional right in the first sentence of the First Amendment? So what legislation would be used in order to arrest me? And furthermore, what legislation would be used in order to provide the search warrant necessary to allow somebody into my house so they can remove me from my house so that they can give me this injection? Where's the legislation that says that? How are they going to write that warrant? What is that warrant going to be based upon? What other violations of the Constitution would happen if somebody were to issue a warrant to have somebody come and take me from my house against my will and be given a vaccination that I didn't want? Where is all of this stuff headed? And furthermore, we know that this is nonsense. We know it's all bullshit. That's what it is. It's very high level bullshit. It's Harvard level bullshit is what it is. This is the kind of arguments that you get when you've been a professor of law at Harvard for so long that you no longer know what law is, what freedom is, what the Constitution says. It's all gone. Now it's all in the minutia. Now it's all a legal argument. If Dershowitz is saying that the states have the power to compel individuals to do whatever the state determines without definition, if he wants to say that we can issue a lockdown order without legal authority, without a definition of an emergency, without the terms from which the emergency will be lifted, without the considerations that will enforce the people who are doing the lockdown to lift the emergency, all of this stuff, all of it. It's just raw tyranny in the same fig leaf that's always used in raw tyranny, and that is for the public good. If we only save one life, surely it must be worth it. If we were to abandon all of our constitutional freedoms, if we just save one life, it must surely be worth it. Nonsense, ridiculous. This is so much of a bigger threat to the American public health than any virus you want to come up with. This idea that the government is empowered to come into your house against your will and take your children out against your will and put a needle into their arm and inject them with something against your will. I want to reiterate again that I am an enormous supporter of vaccines. Vaccines have saved billions and billions of lives. And the reason I'm able to tell you this without suffering from rickets or dropsy or tuberculosis or whooping cough or smallpox or any of that, all this stuff, or polio, it's a no-brainer. But to say that it is beyond the individual's decision to do this smart thing and to make it mandatory is repulsive and disgusting. And I would have thought that Alan Dershowitz, a person of the same kind of heritage who had had millions of his own people, his co-religionists, taken away because the government didn't like something that they were doing, saying, or believing, is especially repugnant in a special kind of a way. All of the lives of all of those Jews who were murdered by the Nazis must be screaming out to him now and saying, are you really seriously saying that the state should be allowed to take people out of their houses and give them injections, or perhaps subject them to some sort of aerosol treatment, maybe would be a more efficient way to get this vaccine through the population? For a man like that to make a statement like this, it's disgusting, it's immoral, it's un-American, and it is intellectual. And this is why, of all the things the COVID-19 pandemic has done for this country, the first thing and the most important thing it's done is to discredit experts in the medical field and in the legal field who have gotten so far down into the weeds that they don't have any idea what sunlight looks like anymore.
You know, I don't want to question Alan Dershowitz's motivations because I don't know the guy. I don't know why. I'm not saying that I don't think he has some wrong motivations. What I'm saying is I don't know what his motivations are. It occurs to me that somebody who is maybe in his 70s, who is in that at-risk group, gets a little bit more lathered up about the potential for getting a disease and therefore basically exceeds his grasp of the law with his concern for his own well-being or the well-being of those that he loves, and has extended an argument he might have made 30 years ago would have been a little different. But in any case, I think he's fair in saying that the state can prevent you from doing certain things if you have not taken the precautions to prevent the spread of disease. The state does that now. You have to you have certain vaccinations before you can attend school. You have to show proof that you have these vaccinations. There are other activities that you need to, that when you want to do them, you have to have certain health guards in place. If you want to open a restaurant, you have to follow certain cleaning protocols and inspection protocols so that the public can be safeguarded against the potential for the spread of communicable diseases in those places of business. I think where you run into trouble is with that very intentionally provocative phrase that he used about the state has the power to take somebody into a doctor's office and to plunge a needle into their arm, or his or her arm. And I think that's where you get into the problem. I think that state governments do have sort of what was called loosely police power. That doesn't necessarily mean an officer with a gun, but the idea of being able to enforce laws within the boundaries of a state that is limited within the state and is not a federal power. And they do certainly have responsibilities when it comes to public health that we have put up with, that we have granted and we have allowed and we continue to allow. But where it comes into a problem is when you empower the state to proactively take action on your person to do what they think is right at a particular time. And Dershowitz, by the way, agrees when Jason Goodman, the interviewer, asked him about the fact that the science has been far from settled on this issue and that there are a variety of opinions as to causes and prevention and all that kind of stuff, that how could the state then be given the power to make the decision that this particular vaccine, for example, is efficacious, and therefore that's the one you have to have.
Irrelevant.
So it doesn't, Dershowitz basically said, look, you're right. We don't know, but this is democracy, and therefore the people's elected representatives get to make the decisions to implement the power of regulating public health in order to prevent the spread of contagious diseases.
It's a Republic Harvard professor. I'm sorry, Scotty.
You know. I'm tired of beating that argument every time it comes up. That's the only language they use. Everybody knows what it means. But I think where Dershowitz really runs afoul of individual liberty is that idea of saying, let's give the state the power to protect your health and thereby ostensibly the health of others by physical force. I think he's on safer ground when he says things like, as Bill suggested, if you're not vaccinated against this, I'm sorry, you can't come to the theater. I'm sorry, you can't go to a public gathering when it's possible that you're a carrier of this disease. That said, Americans are not stupid in general. And Americans tend to care for themselves and their families and their own communities. And they, by and large, without compulsion of law, have gone out and gotten the vaccinations that they need to get to prevent the spread of disease because they think it's a good idea. And where people empower error often is by commanding something when they merely could provide the information and the opportunity, and the people would flock to that without being coerced. For Stephen Green and Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members at BillWhittle.com for making Right Angle possible.